Hello and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Olive Esplin and I'll be your host for this webinar. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You're welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments, insights, and questions. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is on July 23rd with Bob Taylor. He will be giving a presentation entitled Hidden Gems in the Family History Guide. If you would like access to a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from Kathryn Grant, who will be talking about family tree reason statements made easy. Before we begin, here's a little bit about our speaker. After years on the sidelines, Kathryn began doing family history. Somewhat to her surprise, she discovered that she loved it. Her specialty is helping new family historians find success, and maybe even avoid some of the mistakes she's made. Kathryn teaches Sunday classes at the BYU Library Family History Center and presents at other family history events. Her column on the family history ran in the Nauvoo Times for about a year and is still available online. In addition, she's a regular contributor to the Family Search blog. Kathryn works as a technical writer and instructional designer with a focus on usability and process improvement. Her current work assignment includes developing training used on mobile devices. Besides family history, she loves uplifting music, thought-provoking books, and real maple syrup. If Kathryn is ready, we will turn the time over to her.
Great. Olive, thank you so much. I will share my screen here. And we should be good to go. Well, everybody, welcome to our webinar. Thanks for joining us today. This topic is Family Tree Reason Statements Made Easy. Here's a look at what we've got on the schedule for today. First of all, we're going to talk about what reason statements are and why they matter. Then we'll talk about why we love and, to be honest, sometimes hate reason statements, how not to write a reason statement. We'll have some kind of funny and interesting examples to look at. Then how to write effective reason statements. And finally, we'll wrap up by talking about some tools to make adding reason statements easier. So what are reason statements and why do they matter? Very simply, a reason statement in Family Tree explains why an action that was taken is correct. So in other words, whenever we do something in Family Tree, we want to explain why it's right. For instance, why the source being attached to a profile really applies to the profile, why the information that we're adding or changing is right or correct, why a merge is correct. So reason statements are needed in all these instances, and one of the main reasons is that Family Tree is a shared tree. So other users need to know what you were thinking and why you did what you did. Reason statements are part of being a good Family Tree citizen. And the interesting thing about that is that reason statements may even help you, because I've had this experience. As time passes, you may forget why you did what you did. And then also, the sanity you save may be your own. So if reason statements are so helpful, then why do we both love and hate them? Let's look at the reasons that we love them first. So we love reason statements because they help us think through our logic. It's actually a very helpful exercise to think through your logic when you're trying to figure out if a merge is correct, for example, or if a source really does apply to somebody. They help us remember what we did and why. We alluded to that. They also help us understand what other users did and why, and they can help prevent incorrect changes. So if we carefully explain what we did, it's less likely that someone will come along and say, oh, that's wrong, and just change it, because they'll see that we had a good reason for doing what we did. Okay, but we don't always love reason statements. Sometimes we hate them, truth be told. The first reason is kind of ironic because it's also a reason we love reason statements. We can get really frustrated when they make us think through our logic because thinking through our reasoning process is not always easy, right? And it's not always pleasant. So this exercise can be a little bit of a challenge, even though it's very valuable. They may seem tedious to write. Sometimes we look, oh, do I really have to write this reason statement out? And we're going to be talking about some ways to make that easier. And then, frankly, sometimes we just don't know what to say. So, with that as a backdrop, let's look at some not so good examples. I've kind of categorized them into different categories. So the first category is I couldn't think of what to write reason statements. And these are actually reason statements that are in Family Tree right now. This person put yup on all of their their reason statements. They were probably relieved, and to their credit, at least they put something instead of leaving it blank. But we gotta all agree this is not a particularly helpful reason statement. This one was possibly less helpful, and this person also used this reason statement over and over and over again. It was just, okay, that's why it's correct. Here is another example. The next category I'm calling non-reason reason statements. In other words, they just don't really provide a reason. So this person was trying to explain why this birth date and place was correct. I'm not sure I even understand what they're getting at there. They wanted to enter the information. So this reason didn't really tell me anything about why this vital information is correct. This one is a huge red flag I've noticed lately. Jetcom data is not a reason that anything is correct. Sadly, it's actually become a red flag that things are not correct, as many of you may have found. So, if you see a reason statement like this, I would suggest erasing it. Know that there's a high probability that the things added by GEDCOM are either duplicates and or incorrect. Fix it if it's on your line and if you're so inclined, if that's a priority for you, and then put in a good reason statement, which will give some examples of good statements later on. Here's another one actually that I see often, and I know that the intent is good. So let's talk through why this is not a good reason statement. Probably a lot of you are aware that Family Search requires or strongly recommends that we use standards in our dates and geographic locations. Because if we can't all agree on a standard, it can be very confusing to know what somebody's personal abbreviation meant when they put in a place name in Family Tree. So we're encouraged to use these standards that are set by Family Search. Sometimes people come across a record with a birthplace or a marriage place or whatever that has not been standardized. So they standardize it and then they put the reason it's correct is that they standardize the location. But saying you standardized it does not provide any evidence that the location is correct. And what if this was actually not the birthplace? Then standardizing it didn't really help. I mean, it made it standard, but it didn't fix the wrong birthplace. So anytime you see this, I would also recommend deleting it and putting in an explanation for why this information is correct. Here's another one that makes me laugh. This was actually shared with me by a person that I was helping with family history. So the reason that this person put in for proving that a marriage happened was that the couple had kids. And somebody else that was with us that night quipped that, well, that doesn't exactly prove that they were married. But, oh, and I wanted to say, I'm calling these weak reason statements. I tried to think of a better word because I didn't want it to sound critical or denigrating to the people who did these reason statements because at least they tried. I mean, they didn't put in something nonsensical. They really did try to explain. in some fashion. And so, but they just aren't as strong as maybe they could be for proving that this information is right. So they had kids. Yeah, we covered that. Here's another one that again, it's good that they put something in, and there is a certain logic to saying, well, if they're over 100 years old, they're probably deceased. But actually, not necessarily. There are people who live to be past 100. And more to the point, this statement doesn't provide any proof that the person is actually deceased. It's just basically stating an assumption, a pretty well-founded assumption, but an assumption nevertheless, it's not proof. Another one, this also just made me laugh. So, from what I can guess, somebody came along and was working on their ancestor, and they noticed that somebody had connected a husband. And they said, well, I've never heard of him, so they disconnected him. Well, given that they were both born in the 1870s, is it possible that this lady married this guy and that this user in 2024 or whatever had never heard of him? Yeah, totally possible. So again, that at least they put something. We know something of their justification for deleting this relationship. But is that proof that they weren't married? No, it's not. So that's why it's categorized as a weak reason statement. Here's one that may be a little surprising. This is a merge reason statement, and you may be saying, well, what's wrong with that? It's not so much that it's wrong as that it could be so much stronger. So the fact that you're merging these two people already indicates that you believe that they're the same person. So it's actually better to explain how you know they're the same person. And we'll be looking at examples of that later on as well. This one is not in a screenshot because my sister texted it to me. So I just have her copy and paste from the text. But it was another good example of a weak merge reason statement. So this person wrote, possibly these are the same individuals, but the surname and the birth date are somewhat off and there's no source. So that makes it difficult to determine. Well, as my sister looked through it, they actually weren't the same person and she had to unmerge them. So this is an example of when thinking through our logic could help us avoid a mistake because this person kind of started to do a good job of thinking through the logic. They're like, well, the surname doesn't match, the birth date doesn't match, and there are no sources. We would hope that the logical conclusion of that would be, wow, I probably shouldn't merge. But they went ahead and merged anyway, and then that had to be undone. So when we think through our logic, it's not enough to just think through it, but then we need to take the appropriate action based on the logic. And finally, in our bad examples is my favorite one, I think, of all the reason statements that I've ever seen. I'm calling this an anti-reason statement. This was a merge reason statement that was shared by a fellow missionary at the library. And he found this statement that said that for a merge, reason for merging, well, I don't think these two people are really the same, but I'm merging them to clean up the tree. Well, when you merge two people who aren't the same, it actually doesn't clean up the tree. It mangles the family lines and makes a bigger mess. So, with all that being said, then, if those are bad examples, how do we write an effective reason statement? There are four criteria for writing effective reason statements. And I do need to say right here that I am giving my opinion. It's based on a lot of experience in Family Search, reading probably thousands, tens of thousands of reason statements over the years. But this is not a mandate by Family Search. It's not a policy or anything. So I'm just offering it maybe as best practices for writing reason statements. So if, in my opinion, effective reason statements have four qualities. They are relevant. In other words, they actually do provide a reason for whatever action we have taken in Family Tree. they're specific. They include key details. They're not too vague. That doesn't mean they have to be long. They can be short and specific with key details in just maybe a sentence or two. They're clear, they make sense to other users and to ourselves. And finally, they're objective. They rely on evidence, not on speculation or hearsay or just our own assumptions. A couple of additional tips, or actually, no, that's the next slide. So here are the first set of tips I wanted to give for writing effective reason statements. One is this might seem a little bit strange, but I found it to be true, and that is to use complete sentences. A lot of the negative reason statements I've seen don't use complete sentences. About complete sentences is they do force us to think a little bit more clearly in order to write a complete sentence. So give it a shot. You might be surprised at how this helps you write an effective reason statement. The next one is to focus on the ancestor and the sources. So yup and K didn't do that. And there were a couple of other examples where if the person had focused on the ancestor and sources, likely the reason statement would have been more solid. Third one is if you infer information, explain why and how. And we'll be giving an example of that in just a few minutes. And then finally, if there is conflicting information, explain that. So a good example of this is that from time to time, I find records that have been indexed incorrectly. Like they'll put the name as, oh goodness, Presceby is one I saw when the name was actually Besceby. So they had the writing was a little bit sloppy, and the indexer had interpreted the sloppy B as a PR. But it was definitely, once I looked at it and I knew from other family records, I knew the surname was Besceby. So I explained that in the reason statement, saying this name was misindexed, but it really is for Besceby. It really does apply to this person. So that's an example of explaining conflicting information. And then here are a couple of additional tips. Don't just copy a source description that is already part of the source. So one time I see this done a lot, I have to suspect that somebody has told people to do this, but I'll tell you why I don't think it's a good idea. And that is that they will find an English birth registration, for example, on the free BMD website. And then instead of writing a reason statement explaining why that birth registration is correct, they'll just copy the birth entry that has like the name, the quarter, the page, the volume, and they'll just paste it in the reason statement box. Well, not only is that redundant of the source, but it also ends up looking a little garbled in the reason statement box. And a lot of people who are not familiar with English civil registration couldn't make sense of it. They'd look at it and go, September quarter, page 5, what? What is this talking about? And besides the fact that if you went into sources, so on this one, I should make a little comment here. Family Search has the equivalent of FreeBMD. So it's actually better to attach the Family Search source than pasting in stuff from FreeBMD. But even then, if you pasted in that information, it would be on the source. So why copy the information that's already there into the reason statement box? That's my justification for why that's probably not a good idea. Plus, there's a better way to write reason statements, which we will see. And the other bit of advice is just to quiz yourself. When you're writing the reason statement, ask yourself if the reason statement really does explain why what you did is correct. And ask yourself if this would make sense to other users. Think of your parent or your child or your friend or somebody else who comes to the reason statement with no context. They stumble on the profile, they see a reason statement that you have written. Would it make sense to these other people who don't have the context in their head that you have? So now let's look at some examples of more effective reason statements. And at this point, I need to make a comment, another caveat, I guess. So in Family Tree, most of us are not professional level genealogists. I would say the large majority of users of Family Tree are not professionals. We're in there because we love doing family history. Maybe our parents have done it, and they've gotten us involved, or for whatever reason we get involved, but we're not credentialed genealogists. Some of you have probably heard of the genealogical proof standard, which is a wonderful standard used by professionals, and actually it's a good standard for anybody, but it is pretty rigorous. And so some people might ask, should I apply the genealogical proof standard when I write a reason statement? I think it's appropriate to apply to the research and to your own notes, but I don't think it's fair or realistic to insist that every family tree user at every level write a reason statement that complies with the genealogical proof standard. I honestly think that would probably scare a lot of people away. And that's the last thing we want to do, right? We want this to be an inclusive site where everybody is welcome. They build their skills, they feel like they can participate, and they don't feel like they're being held to some impossible standard, especially when they're starting. So that is my reason for when I write reason statements here, I will point people to sources instead of writing a rigorous analysis of the source. I'm going to leave the analysis to the individual user based on their level of competence. And as they build skills, it's going to get better. So I say, here's an example. I got the birth date from the christening record, and I got the birthplace from the 1911 census. And so people then know exactly where I got the information from so that they can confirm it if they choose to. To help with that, you always want to tag sources. This is a wonderful feature in Family Tree where you can tag a source to a certain event, like a birth, or a certain piece of information, like a residence. And then that way, people can see immediately what sources support this information. So notice I've tagged the christening record and I've tagged the 1911 census. So now anybody can just click on this and they can immediately look at that source and evaluate it for themselves. So the purpose of this webinar is not to go into deep detail about source tagging, but if you are interested in that, here is a link to a webinar. It's on YouTube, so I can give a link to this presentation at the end. I can throw it in the chat, and then you can either click in this slide deck and go to this slide and click this link right here. I started to point with my finger as if you could see me. Here, let me use the mouse. You can click on this link to go to the YouTube link, or honestly, it's super easy to find if you just go to YouTube and search for understanding source tagging. For me, when I searched, it came up as the first result. Okay, here's another example of explaining why vital information is correct. In this case, it's a marriage year and county. So I found the marriage for this couple in English civil registration, which gives a year and it also gives a registration district. But the trick here is that registration districts often cover more than one county. So the registration district did not give me proof that my people got married in Cambridgeshire. However, here's how I inferred that information. Let me back up and go through the whole thing. So I explained that the marriage year is provided in the civil marriage registration, and of course I put this in sources. And then I comment that it was supported by the 1911 census, which indicated that the couple had been married for 2 years at the time. So for 1908, that's approximately right, off a little bit depending on both the month they got married and the year the 1911 census was taken. But 2 years is pretty good there. And then I put that the county is inferred from the family's residence in multiple census records. So they lived in the same county all the time, forever. As far as I know, they did not move out of that county. And the county in which they lived, Cambridgeshire, is in the registration district of Wisbech, but there were some other counties in it as well. However, given that my family always lived in Cambridgeshire and that it was part of Wisbech, I felt very confident putting the county of Cambridgeshire as the marriage place. Now, of course, later on, if I get the actual marriage information, I'd come back here and I'd adjust the place and I would adjust my reason statement. But for now, it explains why I believe that Cambridgeshire is the correct county. But I do make it clear that it's an inference and not specifically documented in the source. Number three, this one is a little bit of an exception to the full sentence advice. So if we did a full sentence here, it would say something like, this source provides blah, 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 or this census or this document. But honestly, where the reason statement, it appears even in the changelog. So here it appears right under reason to attach source, and in the changelog, it appears under the reason that the source is attached. So I figure I'm just going to start it with provides, and that the document, it will be understood that I'm saying this document provides evidence. So here we're just saying why I feel that this census should be attached, because it provides evidence of where Ruth was living, so of her residence, her birthplace, her approximate birth year, and her family relationships. Those are the four key reasons that I attach this source to Ruth. Example number four, a merge reason statement. So for merge reason statements, I always recommend that we include the names and the PIDs of the people we're merging, because this information shows up in the changelog. And if there's a merge later on, it may not be obvious who was merged at the time of this merge. And then I just put some key facts of why I know these two profiles represent the same person. In this case, they were both married to the same woman. She had the same name. They married her on the same day, exact same location. So that's why I know that these two profiles should be merged. At this point, it's worth bringing up the issue of canned reason statements. As far as I know now, they are only used on merges. I've seen them used on other things in the past, but I believe that those were discontinued. And actually, the canned reason statements on the merge screen are also being largely discontinued. Just more on that in just a second. But as far as canned reason statements, if you're still using them, definitely, yeah, use them if they meet the four criteria of relevant, specific, clear, and objective. The trouble is they usually don't. The good thing is you can edit them as needed. So when I said they usually don't, let me show you what I'm talking about. And these are the reason statements that are being discontinued. So this first one, everything matches. Almost every time I've seen that used, everything didn't match. I mean, the years were different, the names were spelled different. My guess is that people just clicked add without actually reading this and thinking about what it meant. This one also has been a huge red flag. Some details contain minor conflicts. Almost every time I've seen that used, I mean literally, I think I've seen twice when it was used correctly. The other hundreds of times I've seen it used, the minor conflicts actually meant that the two people were not the same. So this was not a good reason statement. This is a huge red flag to me whenever I see it. So I would not use this one either without editing it appropriately. Actually, if you think you should use it and there are minor conflicts, probably you want to go back and look at those two people more carefully to see if they really should be merged. The good thing is Family Search realized that these statements are being used incorrectly and they're being phased out. So some of you may have seen the new merge experience. It's being rolled out gradually to users. So the new one does not use these canned statements and it's got a 3 column layout. If you haven't seen the new merge experience but you'd like to, then go to Family Search Labs, look for the merge experience and click try it. And that will enable it for you even if it hasn't been rolled out for your section. I don't know how they're choosing, like who they how they choose who to do the phased rollout for. In other words, like who's part of group 1, who's part of group 2. I have no idea on that. But all I do know is that if you don't see it yet, you can go to Family Search Labs and you can enable it. So be aware that those are being phased out with good reason. The little exception to that is that for a merge that is very high quality, in other words, the two profiles are very, very, very similar, the merge reason statement will be populated with something that says that there were no inconsistencies. Again, I would recommend adding to that reason statement and putting in the names of the people and the PIDs and saying why you believe they're the same. I think the more information we give other people, the better. And this is one of those times when thinking through our logic can help us avoid a bad merge. So again, a good reason statement for merge often will include the people's names, their PIDs, and just a couple of key points of how you know that they're the same person. Finally, last example is when you're marking something not a match. In this case, Family Search had recommended that I attach this 1881 census to my guy, James Goodwin. But as I looked at the census, it became very clear that it wasn't for him. It was for a different James Goodwin. So I hid the high points in this reason statement. My James Goodwin, this M7, etc., etc., was born in Surfleet, Lincolnshire. His occupation was engine driver. But the guy in the record hint, he was born in a totally different county. He was a fisherman, far cry from an engine driver, and he had totally different children than the children that I had found for my guy, James Goodwin. So this does appear in the change log, but this kind of detail is also helpful to Family Search because then they understand why we match things or mark things as not a match, and then that helps them improve their matching algorithms. A little tip before we go to the last section, sometimes you might be writing a reason statement and the box is too small. But most of the time, there will be a little handle down here in the lower right-hand corner of the reason statement box. If you click and drag that, you can make the reason statement box bigger, and it can just make it easier to see everything that you're writing. Okay, we are to our last section of the webinar, and that is tools that can make adding reason statements easier. So once you start adding reason statements, you start to realize that the same statements are often needed repeatedly. For example, the same statement applies to a lot of census records. The same statement applies when you're attaching christening records. So, is there any way to avoid typing the same thing over and over and over? That's part of the tedious problem, right? I remember actually a friend of mine mentioned that a person that she knew who was adding reason statements in Family Tree just flat out said that they wouldn't do it. And the impression she got was because of the tedium, just because, hey, I don't want to take the time to write that all out. Well, I think the person maybe didn't really understand the value of reason statements, but I can sure empathize with them feeling like they didn't want to do this tedious job of figuring out what to write. So, here are a couple of options that can help with the tedium of writing out the same reason statement over and over. Number one is to create a file with reason statements. The second option is you can use a clipboard program like Windows Clipboard or Yankee Clipper or any number of others. or you can use a form filler browser extension. Let's take a look at each of those three options. So the first one, you could almost call it low tech, except it uses an electronic document. So in this solution, you create a document in Microsoft Word or in Google Docs or Dropbox, whatever online, Evernote, whatever online app you want to use, and you just put your reason statements in it. You type them out or you copy them from someplace. I actually have a file in Google Docs that I can share with people if you're interested. So you put your reason statements in this file, and then whenever you need to use a reason statement, you open up the file, you select the reason statement, and you copy and paste it into the reason statement field in Family Tree. Number two, you can use a clipboard app. So a clipboard app is something that remembers things that you have copied and pasted. Most of them have a limit, like they'll remember the last 10 items or the last 50, and as you add new ones, they get bumped off the list. But a lot of these apps also allow you to pin or save things that you have copied and pasted. So if you used a clipboard program, you could first of all copy and paste a reason statement, then open up the clipboard, and in this example, this is Windows Clipboard. You can pin the reason statement so that it stays on the clipboard at the top. And then anytime you want to paste that reason statement, you just open up the clipboard app and you paste it into the reason statement box. This is a little, shoot, I was going to try and compare this to the file solution. This one might be a little, it's probably harder in some respects and probably easier in some respects. The document is easier to just scroll through and see a lot of reason statements. This one, they're maybe not formatted quite as nicely. It doesn't make as good use of screen real estate, but still it's very convenient and you can just click and add that statement. So my advice if you want to use either of these solutions is try them out. See what works best for you and pick one. Then the last one is to use a form filler browser extension. So, a lot of creative and talented people have made browser extensions. They're called extensions because they extend the functionality of the browser. So, this is a screenshot of the Chrome Web Store, but every browser has an equivalent as far as I'm aware. Someplace where they've got a list of extensions. Some of them are free, some of them cost money, some of them are very cheap, some of them are not so cheap. You've got the whole gamut. So if you want to look for a form filler browser extension, just type in form filler in the search and you'll get a list of these different form filler extensions. I'm going to talk about Simple Fill because it's the one that I landed on, that I like the best. And I've only tried a couple of them, but I felt like this one met my needs the best, and your decision may be entirely different. One thing I do need to mention about Simple Fill is that it was free for about a decade, maybe longer than that. And so I've mentioned it in other webinars. I recommended it to people. We used it for free forever. Just recently, I would say within maybe the last 8 months to a year, the developer did a major upgrade. So it's got some wonderful new functionality, but understandably, he decided to start charging for it, which I totally get. But I wanted to be very clear that this is not a free extension, and I'm not advising that you buy it. I'm just describing it so that you can make your own decision. I do think it's very reasonably priced. So it does still have a free level, but the free one is doesn't have all the full features that I really like for reason statements. So I got the top of the line one, but it's only 10 US dollars. So honestly, considering that it's so useful and that I used it for over a decade for free, I really didn't feel bad about paying $10, and it's a lifetime subscription. It's not an annual $10. It's pay $10 and use it forever. So here's how a filler form extension works in a browser. I'm going to show Simple Fill, but the others would be pretty similar. In concept, they would be kind of the same. So the first thing you do in a browser extension is they will have a place where you can populate information that you are likely to use when filling out a form. Now, I should say these form fillers were not designed for family history. I've never found one that was designed for family history. They're designed for web forms. So people can use them for quarterly tax forms, for example, or to fill out registration forms. They would populate all their different fields like name, address, or, quarterly tax filing status or whatever. They'd put all this information in, and then it's in the extension so that you can use it whenever you want. How do you use it? Well, in the case of Simple Fill, you've got two options. So in this example, we are on the source linker, and I am filling in a source for let's see, this must be a census, 1911 census. So in reason to attach source, I start typing part of the name of the reason statement that I previously created in the browser extension. And so I know I want the reason statement about a census. As it turns out, the one I want is at the top. So as I start typing, it starts populating a list of matches. So I see the matches, I see, oh, this is the one I want. I click it, and it populates the reason statement. The other option is you can use a menu in Simple Fill. So then you right click in the reason statement, you get this pop-up menu, you choose Simple Fill, you choose the type of reason statement you want, and then when you select it, it just populates whatever that reason statement is into the reason statement box. So that is a very high level of how to use Simple Fill. If you're interested in more information about it, see this webinar. This is a link to the webinar, and the name is Using the Simple Fill app for Family Tree Reason Statements. Also, you can find it really easily by going to youtube.com and just doing a search. So that brings us to the end of our webinar today. Just by way of summary, reason statements are valuable because they help you and others. Effective reason statements are relevant. They provide a reason. They're specific, clear, and objective. And there are tools that can make it easier to add reason statements. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us for this webinar today. And Olive, do we have any questions?
I don't think we have any questions.
Okay, sounds good.
Awesome. I'll just go ahead and share my slide again.
And then somebody asked a really good question about Record Seek. So any of you, Record Seek is a browser extension that lets you attach sources that are not in Family Search. And it's awesome, except that recently Chrome got really strict about um, their rules for extensions, and RecordSeek no longer meets those rules, so the browser extension doesn't work. However, if you go to RecordSeek, recordseek.com, and notice down here it says you can install the browser extension. I actually only know that Chrome is disabled, that Google disabled the Chrome Record Seek extension. I do not know about the others, whether they're still working. But there is a workaround. See this button right here? It says, or drag the button below to your browser's bookmark bar. So here is the bookmark bar. You can just click, hold, and drag this button and drop it on your bookmark bar, which I did earlier, and that made RecordSeek show up here as an option. So just quickly, since we actually did not use up all our time, let me go to, let's see, let's go to someplace in Ancestry. how about this 1871 census? So let's say that I wanted to attach this census. This is actually not a real good example, you guys, because Family Search has all the censuses. So I would never advise attaching a census from Ancestry. I just use the Family Search version. But for sake of example, if you're looking at a source that is not in Family Search and you want to use Record Seek to attach it, then you do that thing where you drag the button up to your bookmark bar first. Then you just click Record Seek and it brings up the same thing that the extension used to bring up. So in this case, we're saying we want to attach it to Family Search. It grabs the information off this page, populates it into all the fields, and you can edit them if you want to. And then if you click Next here, it asks you for the Family Search PID, and you just click the PID, or you can search, but I find the PID is faster. Sorry, that's my virus scanner scanning the field. And so you just paste in the PID, and then you click Next. It's going to ask you, oh, sorry, it's not going to go next because I didn't put in anything valid. Let me see if I can LK. I'm trying to find I was seeing if my browser would remember a PID, but it didn't. So I'll just talk through it. When you click next, the next thing you get is a screen that asks you for a reason statement. And now you would have a good idea of what you would put in the reason statement box. And that box works with Simple Fill, and it may work with other browser filler extensions. So that makes it super easy. And then you just click attach and it attaches it to the family tree person. So that's the workaround for using Record Seek now that Chrome has disabled it. Hopefully in the future, the developer will upgrade and comply with Chrome's stricter standards. But until he does, you can just use the bookmark bar thing. Okay, let me see if there are any additional questions that were posted while I was going over that. Oh, it says I need to reshare my screen. You guys, I am so sorry.
No, we
Olive.
caught most of it. I had shared my screen, so I unshared my screen. So I'm pretty sure we caught most of it, but maybe I'm wrong.
Oh, so was everybody able to see my screen? Because you could have unshared Olive and I might. Oh, good. Thank you. I thought you could have unshared and I still didn't share, but apparently you have the ability to reinstate my screen share. So thank you for that. So, given that I blew it on that, you guys, are there any questions that that weren't answered because I had not been screen sharing? Please feel free to ask, and I'll be very glad to answer those questions. Then, you guys, unless there are more questions, I think we're done. So thank you for coming, and Olive, I'll turn the time back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you will join us for our next webinar on July 23rd with Bob Taylor about hidden gems in the Family History Guide. A recording of this webinar will be made available by next week. You can view that on our YouTube channel or on our website. If you have any comments or questions, you can always email us at fh_webinars at byu.edu or follow Facebook and Twitter. Thank you and have a wonderful week.